video. And so I know that we have a number of Assembly representatives on. So why don't we go ahead and get started, allow them to introduce themselves, and we'll begin with you, Christopher. And I'm looking at my screen. We'll go to Cameron, and I see Senator Elby Gray Jackson is on. No, she's not an Assembly person anymore, but she is our state senator. And so thank you for being here, Senator Elby Gray Jackson. We have James Peterson. Pete Peterson is what we know him as, but we'll go down the list. And so why don't we go ahead? Chris, you get started.
And Suzanne LaFrance is here now as well, too.
All right. Hey, Suzanne.
Good evening, everybody. Yep, Christopher Constant here, representative of District 1, the downtown district, and soon to be joined by a second member of District 1. But what does District 1 look like? That's what we'll be figuring out over the next several months. So I am here to welcome you to a conversation on reapportionment. And with that, I'll let other people say hi.
All right. And your district?
District 1, downtown.
Okay, great. Thank you. Cameron.
The only single member district, but not for much longer.
Hey, everybody. Cameron Perez-Verdilla, representing West Anchorage District 3. It's really good to see everyone. Looking forward to the conversation tonight. Hopefully we can provide some good information and answer as many questions as we can. So I'll hand it over to Suzanne.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody. And thank you so much for hosting this conversation. I represent District 6, which is South Anchorage, Girdwood, and Turnagain Arm. And I'm excited actually about the local reapportionment process. We've seen a lot about how the states went, and I think that the way in which we're going to be proceeding, and Chris I know you'll be talking more about that as chair of that committee, is one that will maximize participation and transparency. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Suzanne. Pete.
Well, thank you. And for those who don't know, my given name is James Peterson, and so so sometimes that's the name that comes up on the computer. But anyway, I'm in my third term representing Muldoon and East Anchorage. Previously served 2 terms in the State House. I just finished serving as president of the Alaska Municipal League for the last year. Our convention just got over a week ago Friday. I guess it was a week ago Friday, yeah. And so great here to be here to listen to this discussion. And this is an exciting time to be redrawing the districts that we'll be using for the next 10 years.
Thank you. Felix.
Hi, everyone. Felix Rivera here, represent District 4, which is Midtown. And excited to give everyone an update today on some of these redistricting process, and then talk about all the odds and ends going on.
All right, thank you. Hey, Felix, your mic is messing up a little bit, so just so you know that. And then let's go to John. I know I saw him pipe in. John Weddleton, where are you?
And Crystal Kennedy are both here now.
Okay, Crystal, okay. John?
We got a bunch of us here. Good deal. Hi, this is John Weddleton, and I represent, along with Suzanne LaFrance, south part of town with Bayshore and Ocean View and Southport, Hillside, Turnagain Arm, and Girdwood, all the way down to Ingram Creek, and near finishing up a second term and looking for a third one soon. Thanks.
All right. My neighborhood. And Crystal.
Good evening. It looks like I'm sitting on the dark end of the room here, but anyway. I'm Crystal Kennedy. I represent District 2, which is probably the largest land mass in the municipality, but that includes everything from J-Bear all the way north to the Knik Arm Bridge. So anyway, happy to be with you tonight, and looks like we'll have some fun just talking about this interesting endeavor we're about to embark on. Thanks.
All right, great. Did I miss any Assembly members? I don't think so. This is the most Assembly members that we've had on our community conversation. So thank you for being here. We really appreciate all the work that you all are doing representing our communities. And so before we go to you, Christopher, because I know that you are the chair, of the reapportionment committee. I want to see if Senator Elby Gray Jackson would like to just chime in and say a hello or.
Thank you, Celeste, and thank you for all the work you do and having these Sunday meetings. I wish I could attend every single one of them, but I'm glad I'm here this evening, and I'm equally glad to see so many Assembly members. And as everybody knows, we're still working on our situation. Things are in place by the reapportionment board, but there are going to be lawsuits because of the situation with Eagle River. But I'm just thrilled and honored to be here and listen to what's going to happen at the Assembly level. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Christopher, take it away.
So before I dive in, Celeste, I just want to say that Margot Bellamy also is here, and boy, she's a good partner in her work on the school board, and I want to make sure we welcome her as well. So welcome,
right.
Margot.
Margot, do you want to say a quick hello?
Sure. I'm always happy to be here. And I just really want to thank the Assembly for your advocacy this past week, not just for the district, but for Anchorage. And I am looking forward to having the conversation this evening. So thank you. And I'm just happy to be here, part of the conversation.
All right, thank you. All right, Chris.
Thank you. So where do we begin? So that video took us all the way back to the beginning of this United States of America. Talked about a Supreme Court Justice, Earl Warren, saying the most consequential decision he made in his whole career was a decision that allowed or required a state that had embedded power so firmly into one population's hands that it was unconstitutional, and that can't stand. And so since the beginning of this country, it's been ordered that every 10 years there would be a count. And it's a count of every person present, not every voting person, but every person present. Of course, at the beginning of this country, some people were evaluated to be 3/5 of a person, which is just a scar on our history. But that said, everybody was counted and continues to be counted. And so now here we are. The state has just concluded the 2020 census redistricting process, except of course for the legal challenges that are surely coming related to my district and some Eagle River districts and the East Anchorage district, and how they were apportioned and how they will go forward. Why does that matter? I now live on Government Hill, which is the very north edge of downtown. I can see the buildings out of my window over here of downtown. And my district now expands all the way to Eklutna from a Senate perspective, which is just wild, to the bridge that you cross to get to Palmer and Wasilla. So, but those are the big questions. What about the little questions? Little, I don't mean unimportant. Little, I mean our most close government level, which is our assembly districts. We now, after the state finished its job, according to our charter, had 60 days to make a declaration of malapportionment. The assembly took 15 days to make that declaration because we've been doing our homework. And the homework told us that we are malapportioned for two reasons. One, the census numbers demonstrate that our boundaries are slightly different. People have moved around a little bit, and there's a variation that is in excess of the numbers needed to keep the districts as they were for the last 10 years. But then a second reason was very important to me. Back in 1983, just 8 years into this municipality, there was a decision made to take what's called the single member district from Eagle River to downtown, with the promise that that single member district would rotate from time to time, every 10 years. Because it isn't really fair that you have one district that has a single member. And that single member district landed on the downtown in 1983 and stayed here for the rest of time until now. But in 2020, the voters passed an initiative charter amendment that stated we will move to 6 districts with 2 representatives each, which means we're adding a 12th member to the assembly. My district, our district in downtown, is going to grow about kind of 50% larger, almost 100% larger, and every other district is going to reduce by 1/6 part, plus or minus the variation for the census counts, which means we're malapportioned. So the assembly made that declaration last Tuesday in a unanimous vote, which sets into effect a 6-month clock. We have now 6 months to proceed forward and redraw the boundaries with the required standards being met. My district will go up to approximately 45,000 people, and everyone else's will come down to that. And those numbers are available, but the very fine detail is probably not what's important. What's important is that the districts have to be, like the state maps, compact, contiguous, and socioeconomically integrated. And so that's the challenge that the Assembly faces. And if you wouldn't mind pulling up the timeline, I'll walk us through briefly the timeline, and then I will let other people talk. Ask questions. So if you look here, on November 23rd, we had a committee meeting, and on November 23rd, the Assembly approved unanimously the declaration of malapportionment. We hired a contractor who's going to help us draft maps. And this is not the final. You see it's still marked draft. There's a couple of small changes. Between December 9th and January 6th, we will be preparing and reviewing the materials. On the 12th of January, we will have a town hall. And I believe on the 13th of January, we'll have a second town hall. And then we've moved that committee meeting that's on the 13th to the 14th. Then we intend at the meeting of the 20th to finalize a series or a draft plan to send to the agenda for January 21st for introduction for the February 1st meeting of the Assembly. We'll have a work session on February 11th. And on February 15th, we'll have a public hearing. And then on March the 1st, we'll have a second public hearing because we want to make sure the public has many opportunities to be heard. And by that time, we will finalize the maps. The question that a lot of people ask is, does that mean we will have new boundaries for the 2022 April Assembly election? And the answer to that question is no. There's no mathematical way for us to get through this process in a fair and thorough and thoughtful manner and get the maps through the GIS team to the addressing process, testing to make sure that all the maps are accurate so nobody's getting the wrong ballots, and then get the notice of vacancy published by January the 9th, and then have the election run in the normal order of operations. So the election with new boundaries will happen after the 2022 regular Assembly election. But that doesn't mean the election for the 12th member will be in 2023. It just means we'll be answering those questions about when and how after we get through the process of redrawing the boundaries. And so with that, I would say open it up to other people's input and questions.
Okay, let's do that. So, Chris, so are you saying that 12th seat could possibly be up in 2023? I mean, it could be in existence then, or are you saying after that?
For sure by 2023, but by sometime in 2022, it depends on how the maps are drawn and how the final declaration, the final resolution is published. If there is a vacancy, the charter states a vacancy on the Assembly must be filled within 60 days. So it'll all depend, but there very well could be a special election in 2022 to fill that seat. But there's no way to determine that until we've walked through the whole process and we've had all of the inputs from the attorneys and then the Assembly has made a decision. But for sure by 2023, we will have 12 members of the Assembly.
Okay, thank you. Any other Assembly member want to weigh in? And please remember, you can put your questions in the chat, everyone. If you have any comments or thoughts, we'd welcome those as well. Any other Assembly members?
Do I have to raise my hand? I didn't raise my hand.
No, you can.
Sorry.
Go ahead, John.
I guess Chris didn't address it, but the question's bound to come up. But so for people who get elected in April of this year, should they get moved out of their district, what happens?
That's a great question. And if you go to the website and maybe Ali, you'll put the website for the committee up into the chat for people to go there themselves, you'll see that there's a legal decision in there called Kentop v. Anchorage. And there was a lawsuit way back in the 80s after the first reapportionment after the unification. And the decision was very clear that as a political policy-making body, the Assembly has a right to decide whether or not terms are what's called truncated. That all other things being equal, it's the Assembly's political decision. And I don't know anybody who is interested in the idea of truncating the terms. People are running for office now. The state Senate, has its own process, which Elvie might be able to talk to us about a bit, where the commission itself makes decisions on how terms are truncated. And that's a little wild. For our body, I believe the answer to that question is answered in that Kentop decision. And that's for smarter people than I, like attorneys who've spent a lot of time studying law. But my attorneys have said, we do not have to truncate our terms.
If I may, Celeste, every single senator except for Donnie Olson has been truncated. So I'm up next year anyway, but 19 of us, 18 have to run next year because they're truncated, except for Donnie Olson. Thank you.
Okay. Cameron, were you getting, somebody's going to say something. Go ahead. Was that you, Chris?
Yeah, I just was going to conclude there and say that there is no required truncation of terms. The legal case is very crystal clear, and there are arguments both ways, and those arguments will surely be made in the process of the committee hearings as we go forward, and we'll make a decision collectively when we're done. 6 votes.
Okay, thank you. Cameron?
Nope, no comment at this time. Just really anxious to hear if people have questions.
So Celeste, Alan had a question in the chat, and that gets to the 6 votes issue. So what happens, right? So currently a majority of the Assembly is a vote of 6. 6 is enough to carry any decision, and almost any decision except certain decisions that take a 2/3 majority or 3/4. And so a tie is a vote that fails. And so going forward, once we have finalized the maps and have everything in order and have a 12th member on board, it will take 7 members to get a passed vote. And that's just simple math. And it's the same in any decision-making body just about. And we have those scenarios where somebody's absent, you get a tie vote, and that item fails. But there's one very interesting thing. We've been having a lot of conversation about balance of power. Some of us believe the mayor has been pretty aggressive in trying to assert new forms of executive power. Some of us believe we've been trying to stand up for legislative power. But there is a very interesting power of small numbers. So currently, a veto override vote is a 2/3 majority. Okay? 2/3 of an 11-member body is 7 point something, 7 and a fraction of a person. Well, we can't cut someone into pieces. And so you need 8 votes to override a veto. When you have a 12-member body, you still need only 8 votes to override a veto because that's 2/3 of 12. And so in some ways, in a very subtle way, there is a rebalancing of power back to the intended order of the charter, where an actual only takes convincing one person to come over more than your majority instead of having to get 2 to do those things that are kind of extraordinary measures, taking super majorities. So to me, there's some magic in that small numbers where we actually, through this process, will create a more harmonious and in-balance checks and balance system.
Okay, thank you. And I know we have Rich Kurtner, who is the co-chair of the Justice Committee with the Alaska Black Caucus. And I know he's working on something. And Rich, if you'd like to share, that would be great.
No, I think that our committee has been looking at all the hearings that we've had on redistricting, and so I think what we're looking for is to make sure everybody does have an equal vote, and especially with Muldoon and East Anchorage, that's going to be an issue. It's going to be litigation. We'd like to be a part of that litigation, but our purpose is to make sure that everybody has an equal say in voting and who's going to be their representative.
On that note, if I might, there's a difference between equal representation and proportional representation. And what we have right now is what's called proportional representation. And it's based on the principle of the Congress and how seats are apportioned. But in my opinion, it's never been fair. And the fairness issue comes into the simple fact that one can never equal two. That every district that has two representatives is a district whose residents have more representation than people in my district. And in the process of getting that 12th member, the charter amendment proposal, it wasn't lost on me what neighborhoods ended up being the neighborhoods that had one representative. You know, think about where Mountain View, Fairview, right? Those are the neighborhoods that this single member district settled on. And those folks have been poorly represented, even though the representatives have worked their tails off to represent them, because one can never equal two.
Agreed. Felix, I see you're looking like you want to share.
Yeah, thanks. So I just wanted to speak a little bit to one of the things that the video brought up, which is politicians setting their own boundaries. You know, it's interesting. The state, right, we all know, has a very different way of doing reapportionment than the municipality does and the assembly does. But if you look at the history of the state's reapportionment process, I mean, it is chock full, dripping with politics. You know, we're going to see lawsuits in this reapportionment cycle. We saw lawsuits in the last reapportionment cycle. I mean, if I were to bet, there's probably been lawsuits in every single reapportionment cycle, because it is just, it is a political process. And so if we can just be honest about that, say this is a political process, and be as transparent and open with the decisions that we're making as possible, then we should be fine. You know, the assembly has always had control of its process. And I don't remember, and maybe there are folks who have a longer history than I who do remember issues, but I don't remember any issues with the assembly's reapportionment process. You know, it's been transparent, it's been open, and I feel like we have sort of honored the idea of proportional representation. We've honored the idea of, let's make sure that we are contiguous, socioeconomic, you know, all of these different factors. And so, you know, if I were to choose between the reapportionment process or that the state has or that we have, I would choose our process every time. Thanks.
Thank you. Margot, you want to take yourself off mute and ask your question?
Before we get to Margot's question, because Margot has a whopper, I would love to respond briefly to what Felix just said.
Okay.
And that is, yes, I agree. I would prefer the munis process. The munis process is way less complicated. You know, we don't have 40 districts in the entire state of Alaska. And there have been lawsuits. In fact, the last reapportionment process in 2010, the assembly decided not to declare malapportionment, but were sued and forced essentially to declare malapportionment in 2012, which was very interesting. And so our process has had its own challenges as well. But like Felix said, I would stick with ours more than the state, because that's the one we have and that's the one that we're working really hard for. So Margot, you have a great question.
All right. Thank you, Margot.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. And thank you, Celeste. It just amazes me that we are a community that is divided. And I get it. I think I get it. But, you know, on the school board, we don't get to represent some kids some of the times from some places. We have to represent all of our students, no matter where they come from. And so it just seems to me, I'm just curious. There must be something in the charter that I'm not aware of, but I'm just curious as to why we have to, I mean, this is nothing more than gerrymandering to me. The outcome is going to benefit some more than others. And if we really are, if we're representing the entire city of Anchorage, why do we still hang on to these district pockets of representation? And and really that's where the power is. Some districts are stronger than other districts. They have, I think, so I just don't know. I just wonder why can't we disrupt this and just move to if you are on the assembly, you are representing, and I do believe that most of the people in this room who are on the assembly, I think you do represent the entire community, the entire city of Anchorage, no matter where you're from. But there are some who are more focused on their area, their district. And I just don't see how that benefits all of Anchorage. And so I'm just curious as to, is it possible for us to make a change, and why can't we make a change? And, so that's just my question.
Okay,
because this is going to happen 10 years from now again.
Okay, Chris, before you jump in, I want to recognize Crystal Kennedy. She has her hand up, and so I'd like to hear from her.
John is unmuted too, just so you know. John is unmuted.
Who is?
You have John and Crystal.
Oh, okay, so Crystal and then John.
Well, thanks, Celeste. I appreciate it. And I appreciate Margot's thought and her question in that. And I will say that, well, the problem is we're not all Anchorage. And I don't live in Anchorage. I come from a different town. And even though we obviously have connections, most of us out here in Eagle River believe that we live in a different community. And I know I have had to many times mention that I'm not there to specifically focus on the things that are going on in Anchorage at the expense of forgetting about the differences that are in my community. And I'm sure people from Girdwood feel the same way. So that's where the struggle, if you will, comes from, is in trying to represent all the needs, the differences, the issues, from all the communities. And so I would never want it to be to the point where everything was about Anchorage, because it just isn't. And so the only way that I feel like we can actually work on finessing some of the nuances that are different about these communities is to have districts that are represented by the people who live in those communities. So even though I think it's at the end of the day, a lot of times things are made for the municipality, decisions are made for the municipality as a whole, I think we have to be very careful about not lumping us all into one group in such a way that we forget the more focused and nuanced needs of specific communities. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents worth on that one. So thanks, Celeste.
All right, thank you, Crystal. And so, John, I don't see your hand up, but you're next, John.
That was my hand up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm on my phone and I can't figure out how to do that. But anyway, it's interesting. Margot says that should the assembly go area wide, which is not a crazy concept at all. But very often we hear, why is the school board not by districts? And that comes up fairly often. But I would say in my years on the assembly, I've not seen that one district or another has more power than another. And it'd be interesting to Margot where she might see that. If I would think one has power, it's actually Chris's. Though he represents, he's just one guy. But we all consider downtown as so important to all of Anchorage that we are very attentive to things that happen in downtown. But, broadly, we do think area wide, about the whole city on, I'd say, almost everything that we do. And we give, so it's not like we're very totally parochial about our own district. And you can see that on things like the bonds that go forward. Most of the bonds this time were none for South Anchorage, but we got a lot in the last few years, so less this year. And we just, there's not any real battling for that kind of thing. But, the details, and to address Margot's point, I get a call from Martha who's got a drainage issue in her front yard, and then, a road service area that has the DOT's dumping all their water into their Lursa, or someone's, just little things like that. So many details that really take knowing your district really well that, I think would be lost if we were elected area wide. We just don't know those other areas as well. And it's those details when people call us that are very helpful to them, that we know the street they live on. And that's it just makes that connection. You know, I think government closer to the people is better, and those districts help put us there. Thanks.
All right, thanks, John. Felix, is your hand up again before we go to Christopher? Okay, Felix.
It is, yeah. Yeah, so I have 3 points on this topic, and I really appreciate Margot for bringing this up. It's a great discussion point. So first is, you know, we are the smallest form of local government. And so for me, having the most local representation is better. And for many of the reasons that John expressed, right? I mean, we get hit all the time with very localized issues. And having, you know, if you look at our community council system, for example, I could not imagine having to go to 38 different community councils as an area-wide representative. I would go crazy. And then having to deal with all of those individual issues in those 38 community councils. I much prefer knowing my 9 community councils intimately, understanding their issues. That said, I don't know which particular government has it in the Matsu or if it's Fairbanks, but you know, there is a sort of a mixed concept, which would be interesting to discuss, you know, at some point. But this mixed concept of having some area-wide, but keeping the district. So maybe instead of 12 district-wide district members, we have 2 area-wide and 10 district members, something like that. So, you know, that's an interesting concept to explore. But I think it's really important that we keep that district nature for a lot of the reasons that both Crystal and John brought up. You know, I think one of the things I want to go into for my last point here is this idea of communities of interest. This isn't really a concept that's used in redistricting in Alaska, but in the lower 48, it's used quite often. And it's basically where you keep communities that are similar to each other, demographically, socioeconomically, in a district. And you make a very intentional, you draw that district very intentionally so that this particular community of interest is together and not split up into multiple different districts. You know, right now we have, intentionally or not, we have some communities of interest. You know, if you look at the downtown district, there are Mountain View, Fairview, I mean, huge communities of color in those parts of the district. And if you were to go area-wide, I think it would dissipate a lot of that power that those communities have. And now we would go to an area-wide status. And now those votes and those communities of interest don't matter as much as they would if we kept it as a district. Thanks.
Okay, Christopher and then Cameron, and then I'm going to bounce to Senator Elvie Gray Jackson. It looks like she has something to say there. So Christopher and then Cameron and then Senator.
So first, I have to disagree with one thing. Felix said if you had all those community councils, he'd go crazy. I can tell you, being in local government, you're crazy already, so just go crazy. That said, Margot, interestingly, the history of this question, when I put forward the Proposition 12, which added a 12th member, after I got it on the ballot, I stumbled onto a whole can of history that kind of made my heart sink a little bit. There was an entire collection of African-American activists in this town who fought like mad to get 11 single-member districts that were smaller in scale, that would allow smaller communities to have a bigger voice in the process of the local government. And we didn't get there with 6 districts and 12 members, right? And so the argument that they made at the time is the argument that Felix just kind of danced around and touched on a little bit, that the communities of Mountain View and Fairview will never have representation if the wealthy and privileged are able to pile into one set of candidates and only elect them. And so to me, there's a lot of risk in this idea of having a citywide election of our assembly, because the voices, we need to be held accountable by our neighbors, and they need to know we represent them. And that gets, in some ways, how I describe the job. For me, the job comes in 2 parts, and it fits with the history of the municipality. We have, as John suggested, area-wide duties, and then we have duties based on our district. And if you look at the history, before unification, we were a city government and a county government, essentially, right? And so county governments across the country tend to be area-wide. They don't tend to be districts. And city governments nationwide tend to be district-based. And so when we merged, we kept the districts, but we have duties that are area-wide. And so that's how I've squared that question. But to me, I more chew on the question, and you probably won't like this, of what about the school district being organized by districts so that we can have more people from the neighborhoods where most of these kids live. But that's kind of the framing that I see it as.
Thank you, Christopher. And I see Margot over there chomping at the bits. But Cameron, we're going to go to you, and then Senator Elvie Gray Jackson, and then Margot.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to offer anything new to the conversation, but just want to share, as somebody who, like Crystal, served on both the school board and the assembly. You know, I really was a fan of the area-wide role of the school board when I was on it. It just made sense. And now being on the assembly, I question that more than ever, because I think that on the assembly, we, as Christopher said, have to both be hyper local and be really aware of the specific things that are going on in our neighborhoods, and the neighborhoods and the people in those neighborhoods are very different throughout our city. But we also have to be at a systems level. We also have to be thinking about, you know, things that affect all of us throughout the entire city. And so I would just add that I'm definitely now a fan of having districts and having people who represent specific areas and see the value in that. So much so that this redistricting conversation we're having is pretty important, and really affects how people are represented and how people are elected. It's why I'm so glad there's so many people on this call and are wanting to get involved in this. But yeah, I would just echo a couple of my colleagues, having been on both bodies. It might be time to rethink, you know, how the school board represents the people of Anchorage, and doing that in a way that allow them to both be at that all citywide lens, but then also be focused on one area. And I understand, when I was on the school board, we assigned that, you know, year to year. Each year you would be assigned to a particular community council, and that rotated. But the challenge is that people didn't necessarily live there, and they weren't from there, and they weren't working with that district and that neighborhood for years. And so anyway, different roles, different bodies, but great question. Thanks, Margot.
Great. So right. I thank you guys for that. I really do. It is a great discussion. I believe, you know, from an education standpoint, we can't just represent some kids and not others. We have to represent our kids. So I see the district as different. I challenge the assembly, though, to dare to think a little bit different, to reframe itself. You are representing all of us. I look to each one of you to represent me, no matter where I live in this city. I get it. My pipes freeze just like everybody else's pipes freeze. I should be able to, and I get that you want to be intimately connected to your communities. But I also want you to represent me no matter where I am. The Margot Bellamy's in this community who may live in Eagle River, may live in Girdwood, may live wherever they live. So I get it. But at the same time, I appreciate your input. I am aware that this topic is going to come up for the school board, and I will fight like the heck. I remember 20 years or so ago when we voted that schools belong to the Anchorage community and that school board members needed to represent every child, no matter what their zip code is. So I will be pushing for that until my last breath. But I do thank you. Celeste, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, dear. Senator.
Thank you, Celeste. Actually, I'm intensely listening to my colleagues at the local level, and I really wasn't going to make any comments. But, you know, just like at the state level, we make decisions for the state as a whole. On the local level, we make decisions for the community as a whole. But I think having districts allows us, and I'm going to use that word, to intimately address the concerns of each pockets of our constituents, because there's a lot of people that live in this community. And I really believe that representation by district really works better and allows us to reach out to our community in a prominent and effective way, just like it does at the state level. But again, we make decisions for our community as a whole. And I often thought of the school district and maybe it's a good idea if the school district was had representation by district also. But the bottom line is whatever works so that we can reach out to our community as a whole and make decisions on behalf of our constituents. Whatever works and whatever works best. Thank you, Celeste.
Okay, thank you. And James, Pete, you've been awfully quiet. Did you want to add anything to the conversation, or we'll move on to a different topic?
Well, sure, Celeste. I was thinking that, having, and I think the 2-member districts is another discussion, and, versus single-member districts. If you go to single-member districts, then you're representing about half as many as we are now, which would be somewhere in the vicinity of, say 27,000 or something. And there are people that think that's the way to go, that, and they question whether it's effective to have 2-member districts, two people representing the same district. I actually like the 2-member districts because, not all of us are retired that are on this body. Some people still work a full-time job. And so there's sometimes not enough hours in the day to do the assembly job and your regular job. And so there are times that you have to lean on your fellow assembly member and let them help you out if you're not available. I know sometimes I do that for Forrest, and sometimes he helps me out if I'm not available. So, but anyway, this discussion has gone on before, and I'm sure it's probably going to continue. Thank you.
All right, appreciate it. Well, is your hand up, Christopher?
Yeah, one last thing, very briefly, Margot and everyone else. The answer to the question of how does this change, can it change? It can all change, but this is a change that is in the hands of the people of the municipality, not in the hands of the assembly. Just know that this is a question that is a charter question, not a code question. And so while it's a great question, it's a question that's much bigger than 11 or 12 members.
All right, I appreciate that too. I just want to share that for me personally, I love being connected to every single assembly member, every single school board member, not just those that represent the area that I live in, but there's power for me when you're connected to the majority. So I wanted to share that. Also, let's talk about mask mandate. COVID-19, we know there's some new variants coming around, and I understand the mandate is due to expire, the current one, December 12th, is that correct? And if so, are we looking for an extension? Just what's out there? And we'll go to you, Crystal. How about we start with you? Do you know anything about extensions?
I don't know anything. I know there were a couple of variables that would basically end the mask mandate, and I don't believe we've met at least one of those thresholds, but I would actually have to look back at the ordinance again to see, because I think there was one based on hospitalization. And so anyway, I haven't heard anything about anyone's intentions to expand it, but to be honest, I probably wouldn't be consulted in that to begin with. So,
all right. Okay, anyone else want to respond?
So I'll just talk about process. Crystal mentioned 2 benchmarks by which it could be terminated, but the primary benchmark that is set to come is that an emergency ordinance can only last 60 days. And so the power under the charter to declare an emergency ordinance, use that power, it only can last 60 days. So it ends whether the benchmarks are met or not. And so that's a conversation that's coming for sure.
Okay, I see Suzanne is here on video, so let me go to her. Suzanne, would you like to respond?
Thank you, Ms. Hodge-Grouden. I had turned on my video because I was going to mention what Chris had mentioned about the 60 days, and that since it's an emergency ordinance, someone would have to bring it back before the body, and it would need to have 9 votes if it was an emergency ordinance again.
Okay. Felix?
Yeah, so just the last phrase that Suzanne stated made me want to get in the queue here. So I don't personally have any opinion on extension or keep it where it's at, ending in mid-December. I mean, it's all going to depend on a variety of factors, right? But for me, if we were to extend it again, then I'm just going to state this for my colleagues. It better be an emergency ordinance if we're going to extend this again. That's all. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Anyone else? John, you were quiet on this one, but we'll go ahead to the next.
I'm not quiet on this one. I was laughing when Felix spoke. You just didn't hear me. And actually, I guess it would be a question to throw back at Suzanne. Where is that AO 91 or whatever? I don't remember what it was. I think it's still in public hearing mode. We just haven't closed it out.
Right.
But the triggers on the current one is that 2 of the 3 hospitals in Anchorage get out of crisis standards of care. And I'm not aware that they have done that, though I am aware that the pressures on them from COVID are quite a bit less than they were when we initiated the mask mandate, which is really good news for us. And the other one, I believe, is less than 50 cases per 100,000. And we're heading that way for Anchorage. We're not quite there. So I don't know if in 2 weeks that we would be there, but I'm certainly hopeful. It'd be nice to keep the trend that we're going on. And I think we'd have to speed up a little bit to hit those cases. But hopefully the hospitals, what we're hearing is that they're finding themselves in equilibrium and not in the crisis they were in. And for me, that's been the main trigger all along.
So I would add to that quick that the way that the ordinance is written, it would require 14 days of 2 out of 3 hospitals not being in crisis standards of care. None of the hospitals have made the change from their standards of care, even though from a practice perspective, they haven't been flexing into crisis standards. So there's no way mathematically that we could have it ended under that standard because it's 14 days only until the expiration of the emergency ordinance. And the same really goes through to the case rates. The case rates, even if they dropped below the threshold today, in 14 days, which is how long the ordinance says, it would take that many days plus 2 in order for that standard to be met. So ultimately, it's a question of the expiration.
Okay, I see your hand, Cameron.
Yeah, I guess I don't know if we're kind of dancing around the question that we're really asking, right? But I think the question we're asking is for those people who would prefer that the mandate continue because they feel like that it's a good idea and that it's helping to keep our community safe. The question to them is there a way to continue it because I want it to be continued from that person's perspective? And to the person that doesn't feel like that we should have the mandate in place and is looking forward to the mandate ending, the question on that end is, what will happen? Will you engage in a process and try to, reinstitute this? And I would just say to both of those people, as much as it may seem from the media and others that this is a political process, it has not been, from at least from my perspective. It has been a process of trying to really assess what the need is in the community, to look at the information that is out there and to try to make a sound decision as to whether to put these mandates in place or not. And so that would be the process that I would go through, and I think all of my colleagues would go through to make that decision, whether that's an emergency order or whether that's an ordinance. That's all process, but I think we would need to and will be engaging in looking at the numbers and looking at where we are and having thoughtful conversations about whether we should attempt at trying to re-engage a mandate once this one ends. So it's not the question, it's not the answer I think most people want, but the truth is that we will start hearing from our constituents soon, and knowing the mandate is going to end, who want us to go one way or the other, and we're going to have a conversation about it and make a decision as to what we're going to do moving forward. So.
Okay, thank you for that. And I'm going to quickly go to Yarrow Silvers. You had a comment in the chat. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Oh, so I was just saying about the districts. For me, it's about having another level of localized government rather than centralized. You know, so it's just like you have the president, then you have Congress, you have the governor, then you have, you know, our state house, and you've got the mayor, and then you've got your assembly. So for me, I think it's really important. It actually kind of follows the U.S. Constitution, just to have those that extra layer of really localized government.
Thank you. And before,
you know, you missed one from Anne Marie as well, since we went back to the topic. Anne Marie had a pretty important question, like how do we focus on the three reasonable outcomes, or the three reasonable outlines of the reapportionment process, which I just compact, contiguous, and socioeconomically similar. And my answer to that is tune into our meetings, Anne Marie, follow that calendar, make your testimony when you see draft maps, point out if we missed the mark, and because everything is draft until it's done, and then it gets reviewed by the courts maybe. And so the idea of this meeting and every meeting between now and then is to answer those questions by you holding us to account.
All right, thank you for that. We've got 4 minutes left. And Clifford Armstrong III, what's the status there? Is he still Chief Equity Officer, or who wants to take that one on? Nobody?
It's either me or Suzanne. Suzanne,
go ahead. You're the leader
Yeah.
here.
Well, you know, from the position of assembly leadership, yes, he is still the chief equity officer. And the law, as we've been advised by counsel, hasn't been followed. There's no, there isn't the legal basis for dismissing him. So from our standpoint, and correct me if you see it differently, Chris, I don't think it's changed. He is still, and it will be a very interesting situation when the person who the mayor has said occupies that position now comes to the assembly for confirmation.
right. And, you know, I will dive in a little bit briefly. As you know, Celeste, the mayor has been shopping the individual around, throwing parties, trying to gain community support. And that is that divide and conquer tactic where, you know, it's clear the effort is to take one community of people of interest and set them against another, but it's not really working because members of that community are saying, hey, wait a minute, this isn't right. But there are some who are, so it's a bit of a political football. But where the rubber meets the road is the court. And I believe within the next week, the municipality, the mayor, is due a response in the court. And as soon as the mayor has responded, the assembly council is prepared to act, depending on the mayor's response. And so the assembly has hired counsel to help work on the separation of powers. That counsel is prepared to take the next step. Before the assembly can go to court, a resolution would have to be granted by the assembly to do that. And so all of those things are on the table, but we're waiting for the mayor's response in the court to the lawsuit filed by Clifford. Then the assembly will figure out whether it's a friend of the court or asked to join the case. We'll do that in due time, but it's coming.
All right. Well, we are unfortunately out of time. So I want to say thank you to our assembly members, to Senator Elby Gray Jackson, to Margot Bellamy, school board president, for sharing their time and valuable information with us. We also want to thank our caucus members and Allies for Change group for their continuous support. If you'd like to join our great organization,